Hello, Packer fans, wherever you may be. It is February 6th, 2026, and it's time for another edition of the Pack Attack Cast. While everybody is focused on the Super Bowl on this coming Sunday, we're already looking ahead at hopefully how the Green Bay Packers are going to end up in the Super Bowl in 2027. So, what we're going to look at today is what the Packers defense could look like if they switch to a 3-4 defense, which I think is very likely. Brian Gutekunst was very mum on what they wanted to do, whether it was a 3-4 or a 4-3. He said new defensive coordinator Gannon is going to have to take a look at the personnel. In this case, it means looking at the tape, because the players are not in the building. But you can certainly look at the tape they have both for practice and for games and try to figure out what he's going to do with the front, whether it's going to be a 3-4 or a 4-3. Now, it's important to note that the base defense is a defense that most teams in the league are only in about 25 to 30%, given this is a very pass-happy league. So we're looking at primarily first and second down. And after that, you're going to more likely than not move to some sort of a nickel. So what I'd like to look at today is not only look at what the Packers can do if they switch to a 3-4 defense, but also look at the players they might need to look at in free agency. The truth of the matter is Gannon's going to have to make some sort of a determination before free agency, because there's a couple pieces he's going to need, whether we do a 3-4 or a 4-3, and those pieces are very different based on that front. And when I take a look at the roster, the more I look at it, it makes me feel that a move to a 3-4 is inevitable. And that's with the Packers players that are currently under contract, the salary cap that the Packers have, and the limited draft picks that the Packers have early in the draft really point me in the direction of a 3-4 for the Packers next year. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a switch over, and I'm going to display what I think a 3-4 would look like for the Packers. We're going to have to use our imagination a little bit because we are using a spreadsheet here, but I'm going to try to give you some depth as to why I think this 3-4 will make some sense, especially if they get a key player or two in early on in the free agency process. And it actually, a move to the 3-4 actually really helps the Packers for free agency. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit as we take a look at our spreadsheet. So let's go ahead and switch over to our spreadsheet that I put together. All right, so this is kind of diagramming what I think a 3-4 would look like for the Packers. With a 3-4 front, the most important player on the actual front is a nose tackle. You need to start one nose tackle. And the tricky part here is finding the right players to play your nose tackle. There are just not enough humans in the world, let alone in the NFL, that have the size, temperament, and ability to play nose tackle. Not only do you need to have enough size, you've got to be well over 300. You want to ideally be around 310 to 325 to consistently play the nose tackle. In addition to that, you have to be a selfless player in the fact that you're not going to get as many accolades, because your primary role as the nose tackle is to clog up the middle and take on two blockers from the offense. It's not a glamorous job. It's not a glorious job, but the right nose tackle can really make a 3-4 a thing of beauty. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So let's start out with the nose tackle position if the Packers move to a 3-4. I'm also assuming that when they're running the 3-4, they're also going to run a quarters coverage. We're not going to talk about quarters coverage too much on this edition of the Pack Attack Cast, but we'll talk about it later on and how that will impact some of the changes. We'll talk about it a little bit here, but my primary focus here is to look at how the front is going to change if we move to a 3-4. So ideally, you need a huge human over 310 pounds that is willing to run up the gaps, clog up the A gaps for the offense, and really free up the linebackers. So we're going to talk more about that as we talk about how we find the right nose tackle. Now, the nose tackle that we need is not currently on the roster, and that's why the Packers need to decide early in free agency if they're going to switch to a nose tackle. The closest player that the Packers have to a nose tackle is Nasir Stackhouse. He showed the ability to play that position in college, but I don't think he's ready to be a nose tackle in the NFL. That's why I'm saying Stackhouse would be your backup and your rotational player when your nose tackle needs breaks, and you can develop him in the future, I think, to being a solid nose tackle. So it's one of the reasons that I think the Packers would be well off to switch to a 3-4, because I do think we have some pieces that we can use either as starters or rotational pieces for the 3-4. In this case, Stackhouse would be your backup nose tackle, and you would develop him in the future to be the starting nose tackle. We also have Warren Brinson, which would be solid depth for the nose tackle position. He's a little undersized, but he could probably put on a couple pounds and be a solid depth option for your nose tackle position. Next up would be defensive ends. Now, your defensive ends in the 3-4 are vastly different than in a 4-3. You want your defensive ends to really focus on stopping the run and also occasionally being disruptors as pass rushers in the interior line. So I think Wyatt is going to be an excellent option for one of your defensive ends because he plays well against the run, and he also at times has a really good pass rush win rate, so he can still provide some pressure from the end position in passing situations. I think that the other starter for you would actually be Warren Brinson, who has the size and the physicality to be an end in a 3-4. So we would have Sorrell probably as a depth option as your rotating defensive end when Wyatt and Brinson need a break, but he's a little undersized. But again, I think Sorrell could probably add 5 to 10 pounds in the offseason and be a really good, solid depth piece for defensive end in a 3-4. Now, where it really gets interesting and where I think the Packers really kind of have lucked into a good position where they can have a great 3-4 is we've got players that can play outside linebacker. You're going to play 2 outside linebackers in a traditional 3-4. In this format, you would have Lucas Van Ness as a outside linebacker, and you would have Micah Parsons, who was originally drafted as a 3-4 outside linebacker, in his natural role once he comes back from his ACL injury. So Lucas Van Ness and Micah Parsons would be your outside linebackers and would be primarily focused with rushing the passer on passing downs. However, the interesting thing here is if you're looking at these two players, Micah Parsons, assuming he's fully recovered from his ACL, and Lucas Van Ness, Micah Parsons actually has the better speed. So in situations where you need an outside linebacker to actually provide coverage, which you see a lot when there's a quarter coverage, you do see the outside linebackers cover quite a bit. Micah Parsons might be the player that ends up being a coverage outside linebacker in certain situations. So don't be surprised if Micah Parsons ends up being a coverage linebacker from time to time in a 3-4. Now, you're going to say, Micah Parsons is supposed to be rushing the passer. That's what we traded him for. That is correct. But in certain situations, when you have you have a need for speed at outside linebacker, you're going to see Micah Parsons play coverage, and you might see situations where Lucas Van Ness is the pass rusher and Micah Parsons is providing coverage in a 3-4. In addition to this, I think Edgerrin Cooper can be an injury replacement as outside linebacker because he does excel with his speed at rushing the passer. So you might see situations, especially early in the season, if Micah Parsons isn't 100%, where Edgerrin Cooper fills in that Micah Parsons role early in the season. You can even get more exotic, I think, and use Bullard from time to time as a Micah Parsons replacement, again, as he recovers from his injury. So I think the 3-4 actually lends itself to the Packers because you actually have Lucas Van Ness, who has great speed and physicality as a outside linebacker. Micah Parsons, who was originally drafted as an outside linebacker, fits in this role very well. We have Edgerrin Cooper, who can from time to time fill in that role as well. And if you wanted to get really exotic, occasionally, I wouldn't do this on a regular basis, but you could put Bullard in that spot and have him rush the passer or provide that coverage that you would like to see from the outside linebacker in a 3-4. At inside linebacker, this is where it gets interesting. If everyone is healthy, Cooper would be a starting inside linebacker. And you would have Quay Walker, if he is re-signed, be an inside linebacker. Now, I've already proposed in the video that I posted yesterday, feel free to check that out if you haven't done that the Packers should re-sign Quay Walker if it's less than $10 million because they're going to need linebackers in a 3-4 that have speed and physicality. And I think Quay Walker fits those roles. So it's another reason that they need to make a decision in the next month, because if they are moving to a 3-4, I think you find a way to re-sign Quay Walker if it costs you less than $10 million per year. And that's an average. You can probably find ways that maybe he costs you $8 million this year, maybe $12 million the year after that, just to make it work within the salary cap. But I think Quay Walker would be a key addition in this situation if they switch to a 3-4. So you would want to get your nose tackle early in free agency, then look at re-signing Quay Walker. You can also use Tyron Hopper here, but he's an unknown because we haven't seen a lot of him in actual games. So I'd feel more comfortable with Quay Walker. And I think if they switch to a 3-4, you can justify spending the salary cap capital on Quay Walker if it's less than $10 million for a re-signing. And you can even re-sign Quay Walker for maybe 2 years at about $2 million or less, and then you can start building up linebackers in the draft for the future. Isaiah McDuffie could be an option at inside linebacker, but But one of the challenges with the 3-4 defense is you need linebackers that are able to provide coverage support against tight ends, against running backs coming out of the backfield, against occasionally slot receivers in a pinch. And Isaiah McDuffie, his strength is not in coverage. So that's one of the many reasons that I have Isaiah McDuffie not being re-signed by the Packers. Okay, and then you look at the corners. We're going to have Keyshawn Nixon, Nate Hobbs, and Carrington Valentine, and hopefully a draft pick in the second or third round to round out that corner room. We heard from Brian Gutekunst that he likes the corners that they have on the field, and actually transitioning to a full quarter coverage most of the time would actually help Keyshawn Nixon and Carrington Valentine in coverage, and hopefully Nate Hobbs will be fully healthy next year and provide some coverage as well. So I do think with quarters coverage you can get by with Keyshawn Nixon, Nate Hobbs, and Carrington Valentine, and also round that out with a draft pick that would challenge maybe Valentine or Hobbs for playing time. And one of the strengths of a 3-4 defense is using your safeties. They are extremely important if you're going to use quarter coverage, because the safeties are one of the key components to making quarter coverage work. Generally in quarter coverage, we're not going to go into great depth here, but you're covering sections of the field and not a player with quarter coverage, and it's incumbent upon the safeties to figure out how they're going to make the quarters coverage work. So Xavier McKinney and Evan Williams are extremely important if we're switching to a quarter coverage, as well as Bullard, who is excellent in coverage as well. So in some situations with a 3-4, when you want to get exotic, and Gannon used this quite a bit when he was in Arizona, was you use 3 safeties. So what you would do on certain situations, you would pull an inside linebacker off of the field, and you would have 3 safeties. One of those safeties would then move up into the box and provide that additional inside linebacker. So Bullard would be a great target candidate for that sort of a usage. You wouldn't want to do it all the time, but they did use it a fair amount with the Cardinals, and it was very successful. So don't be surprised if you occasionally see maybe Edrin Cooper as the only inside linebacker, and you have McKinney, Williams, and Bullard out there in coverage as safeties. So the next question we have, and we're going to get rid of our spreadsheet for now, is what do the Packers do to address the fact that they do not have a natural nose tackle on the field? So let's talk about what you want for a 3-4 front. You want to have a big A-gap plugger, which would be your traditional nose tackle. You want to have a disruptive interior pass rusher at defensive end, a 5 technique, which again, I think Wyatt would be an excellent fit for this. So what the Packers really need if they want to switch to a 3-4 is we need a nose tackle. We're not going to get a nose tackle off of what's on the existing roster unless you want to take Nazir Stackhouse, throw him in there at nose tackle, and hope that he is ready for that job. I don't think that's the smart decision. So we need to look for a nose tackle in free agency. So we're going to look for a key anchor, and we're going to use a disruptive piece, which would be Wyatt, as well as a solid run defender, which would probably be Brinson in the 3-4. So there are actually some really good options in free agency this year for nose tackles. And number one, for me, as far as a combination of really fitting the nose tackle role, and also being a relatively cheap piece that the Packers can get with their salary cap issues, is DJ Reader, currently of the Detroit Lions. Now, the Detroit Lions have not signaled that they're going to re-sign Reader, and the Detroit Lions have significant salary cap issues. So I think it's very likely that DJ Reader will reach free agency, and he's a great fit for what the Packers would need for a couple of reasons. Number one, he is a great nose tackle. He would fit in plug and play as a nose tackle week one. Number two, he's 31 years old, and you could probably get him for a 1 to 2 year contract between $4 and $5 million. So look at something in the range of maybe a 2-year contract with $8 million in salary and maybe $2 million in signing bonuses, and you've got your nose tackle. Not only that, we're taking him away from a division rival, and he knows the division really well. So DJ Reader could be plugged in, go against the Lions, and he's practiced against the Lions every day in training camp for years. So he knows that line. He's also played against the Vikings line. He's played against the Bears line. So having DJ Reader plug in week one as a nose tackle would be a great fit for the Packers, and I think they could do it at a relatively cheap cost. And it would be really nice to see DJ Reader blowing up run plays for us instead of the Detroit Lions. Wouldn't that be sweet? Next up, we have, and I'm going to butcher some of these names, I'm telling you right now, David Almanyata would be a great rotational interior nose tackle. You can probably get him for a 2-year, $10 million deal. He's older, but he really fits the role as a rotational nose. So you could actually take Almanyata and rotate him maybe with Stackhouse for a relatively cheap price. That would probably be about $3 to $4 million a year for that player. There's also some players you could look at that would be a little bit more of developmental. It would be Caraisis Tonga. He would be a affordable nose tackle, but that would be a player that you would probably have to develop. If you put DJ Reader in there, I know he's ready, and he will be ready week one. There's also Kevin Givens would be a cheap option. He's in his mid-20s, and he could be a good fit as well. But I really think that you target DJ Reader at the start of free agency with a really attractive contract. You give me DJ Reader with the players that we have, plus a couple draft picks, and I think we would have a great 3-4 defense. Now, my real dream in this scenario would be John Franklin Myers of the Denver Broncos. He is a free agent, and all indications are that he's going to be a free agent. There's been no sign that the Broncos are going to re-sign him. He would be an interesting option at nose tackle. He is going to be very expensive, though. He's probably looking at a 3-year, $45 million contract, and I think that's a little too rich for the Packers' blood. But, I mean, that would be a home run for me if they could get him into a situation where he could be your interior 5 technique on the end, and then maybe you roll the dice with Stackhouse as your nose, and then you have Wyatt on one of the other sides. If you had Franklin Myers, Stackhouse, and Wyatt, that would be a very interesting front for a 3-4. It would be very risky because you'd be hoping that someone like Stackhouse is going to step up and be that nose tackle for you. But Franklin Myers and Wyatt would be very disruptive as ends in a 3-4. So that's going to wrap up my thoughts on how the Packers could switch over to a 3-4 based on the current roster, salary cap considerations, and what they can do in the draft. I really would like to see DJ Reader as being a key target for the Packers in free agency. If they could get him for maybe even $6 million a year, which might be a little aggressive given his age, for maybe 2 years, I think they would have a plug-and-play 3-4 defense almost right off the jump with just that one signing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll be back with some discussion. Hopefully we'll be back next week with some more news and notes for the Packers, and maybe we could start looking at the secondary in quarters coverage for the Packers. So we'll see you next time. Hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, go Pack Go.